The journal is a dynamic record of every checkpoint in a Zerto-protected VM's history. A user-specified journal history can be set to retain up to 30 days' worth of checkpoints. With Zerto's journal-based protection, you can have thousands of recovery points in time for each VM within your virtual protection groups. This means that no matter your disaster, you can recover a file or an entire application within seconds of the event and with consistent and usable data. Each protected virtual machine has its own journal, which consists of at least one thin provisioned virtual disk. During setup, you can specify the exact data store location for each replica disk. You'll also specify the exact data store location for each journal disk per VM. Every write to a protected virtual machine is replicated from the source site to the target site. The write continues to be processed normally on the protected site, and the copy is sent asynchronously to the recovery site and then written to a journal volume managed by a virtual replication appliance, or VRA. The copied writes are sent from the protected VRA to recovery in 16 megabyte chunks called grains, in no specific order to the journal disk. These grains contain markers that indicate how the data is different and what VM or VMs that grain is associated with. Once the writes are applied to the recovery volume, the grains are organized back in the correct order, regardless of which journal disk and where on that disk they came from. This maximizes efficiency, speed, and space. In addition to the writes, every few seconds all journals are updated with a checkpoint timestamp. Checkpoints are used to ensure write order fidelity and crash consistency. A recovery can be done to the last checkpoint or to a user-selected crash-consistent checkpoint. For instance, a user can recover a VM from a specific point in time before a virtual machine was attacked by ransomware, data corruption, or a newly applied patch that caused an application to behave unexpectedly. Change data and checkpoints are written to the journal volumes until the user-specified journal history time or size is reached. Once this limit is reached, as new writes and checkpoints are written to the journal, older writes are written to the VM recovery virtual disks. The checkpoints are committed to the replica disks in a first-in, first-out order. Let's look at an example. If you had a 4-hour journal and it's noon, you can go back as far as 8 a.m. in the journal. At 7:59 and 55 seconds, that last packet will now be a permanent part of the designated recovery disk. That new block on the journal replaces the block that was committed to the recovery volume. Now that we understand how the journal works behind the scenes, let's talk about two important choices you'll make during setup. Zerto will provide default settings, but you'll want to consider how much history you'd like to keep and how much storage you want to allocate to it to maximize resource efficiency within your environment. To make these choices, you'll need to understand the relationship between journal history and storage in a little more detail. When considering your storage needs, it is important to note that the journal is stored on the recovery site. Extra storage on the production side is not needed. The journal data is not written locally before being sent to the recovery site, as with array-based replication. Most importantly, this means that you always have an up-to-date copy of data, even if your entire production site goes down. During setup, the journal defaults to 24 hours. When setting up the journal, there is some planning that should take place. Too little storage will mean that you may not be able to keep enough history worth of checkpoints and may not be able to take full advantage of the journal's benefits of granular point-in-time recovery. Let's say that you're setting up the journal on a new VPG and decide 14 days of checkpoints are needed, and you want to allocate 100 gigs of storage. After the initial sync, writes will start to the journal. The journal starts out as a thin provisioned 16 gig disk. Disk count and sizes are dynamically added or removed to accommodate your protected VM's or application's normal change rate. As the first journal volume fills up, it adds another 16 gig disk, making the journal 32 gigs, and then 48, and so on. If you hit day 12 and you're at your 100 gig maximum, Zerto Alerting will send you a notification. In addition, the journal adjusts accordingly and keeps 12 days of history instead. If the next week the I/O from the production VM is lower, Zerto will adjust again to keep 14 days. If you can keep 14 days and it only takes up 32 gigs instead of 100, the journal will be kept at the smaller size. Zerto's journal adjusts to ebbs and flows of your business and saves you from wasting space.